student loans set up after 2012, the government promised to raise the repayment threshold in line with any rise in average earnings, as they have done with previous student loan schemes. In 2015, George Osborne, the ex-Chancellor, froze the repayment threshold at £21,000 until 2021. He did this without any statement of this intent being made in the Conservative Election Manifesto 2015. He has done this without any communication being made to current students or recent graduates, informing them that this will increase the amount they will pay back each and every year in their student loans. He did this at the very first opportunity to do so, with the first tranche of 2012 students just graduated, and has set a very disturbing precedent for future chancellors and governments. He did this after a derisorily small consultation of just under 500 respondents, covering individuals and higher education institutions. Even so, 84% of the respondents rejected the proposal. The government effectively dispensed with the opinion of many of the individual respondents, citing bizarrely, amongst other things, lack of evidence, and went ahead with the freeze. Raising the repayment threshold through the lifetime of the student loan in line with average earnings is an important safeguard. It is the main safeguard that backs the government's own assertion that the 2012 plus student loan scheme is a progressive one where those who benefit most financially from their university education pay back the most. Without this safeguard in place, students would be discouraged from taking degrees leading to worthy but less well-paid careers. Without this safeguard being honoured, most students will be well advised not to take out a student loan, but thereby effectively putting pay to their chances of a university education. Freezing the repayment threshold for any period of time changes this. The student loan scheme becomes a regressive scheme in which the poorer paid graduate bears proportionally more of the burden of the scheme. It's as unfair and regressive as freezing the personal income tax allowance while retaining the same income tax rates. For example, assuming the 1.5% annual growth in average earnings that the IFS used in its recent report on the freeze, then 4 years into the loan repayment after graduation, all graduates will pay back an extra £146 that year if the threshold were frozen for 5 years. For a graduate earning just over £27,000, this represents a payback rate of 12% on their marginal income, above what the threshold should have been, effectively 3% more than the 9% payback rate that they contracted to in their student loan. For someone on a higher earning profile, who might be earning around £52,000 4 years after graduation, the effective increase in payback rate is just under 0.5%. But of course, regardless of your eventual salary profile, the effect of freezing the threshold hits hardest in the early part of your career where you're earning less. Freezing the repayment threshold into 2021 not only affects current students or students intending to take courses in the next few years, it affects all future generations of students, as the repayment threshold will never catch up to where it should have been in relation to earnings. In fact, there seems to be no constraint on this or any future government from freezing the repayment threshold indefinitely. Ultimately, this would lead to the bizarre situation where the personal allowance for income tax rises above the repayment threshold, effectively now penalising people who went to university compared to their peers who didn't. At which point, I guess the whole system breaks down, because only those who can afford to fund their university education, the children of the very rich, would be the ones that are eligible to or able to go to university. This manoeuvre, this blatant breach of faith by the ex-Chancellor, had nothing to do with student debt. How could it be? The first tranche of students have barely graduated, so there are no hard and fast facts on repayment amounts and rates of default. The forecasts on the viability of the scheme 10, 20 or 30 years into the future must be pretty similar to how they looked back in 2012. But it had everything to do with reducing government debt and achieving his personal ambition of a budget surplus at some ever-receding point in time. Just like the whole sorry and deceptive confection of £9,000 tuition fees, it represents a shift of the burden of government borrowing onto the shoulders of the student and graduate. It's converting government spending that should be used for sustaining and investing in higher education into personal graduate debt. A personal debt burden lasting 30 years, accompanied by a rigorous regime of accounting for every moment of your working life, and potentially ruinous penalties should you default. It poses the question now, what stops future chancellors converting government debt into graduate debt by this devious and fraudulent method? Like many parents, my wife and I had saved some money for each of our 3 children's university education, but not enough to cover the sudden rise of tuition fees to £9,000 in 2012. We needed to work out whether there was any value, any utility in part-paying fees and maintenance costs up front from the money we had saved, or whether we should just keep the savings in reserve and let our children max out on the student loan. We concluded, like many others, that while a part payment up front might reduce the term of the loan by a few years at the end of our children's working life, the money we had saved for them would be much more useful to them in their early adult life, say as a house deposit, setting up their own business, or supporting themselves in an internship, which now seems about the only way to get a foothold in a chosen profession. We talked all this through with each of our children, telling them that loan arrangement was in effect like a graduate's tax. They would probably never pay off the loan debt until it was cancelled after 30 years. But on the plus side, they would only pay a constant extra 9% tax on their earnings above a salary threshold that rose in line with average earnings. It had to in order for the scheme to operate essentially like a graduate tax. This is still the commonly held perception, not just by me, but by many money and consumer experts, people like Martin Lewis. Listen to this clip taken from a Radio 4 You and Yours programme broadcast on the 3rd of August 2016, just 2 days before I made this video.
Yeah, and to find out more about that and what the right attitude really should be to student loan debt, Peter, you talked to Claire Barrett, the editor of Financial Times Money.
I did, yeah.
Your second commentator is right. This is not a normal debt. A student loan won't appear on your credit file, so it won't prevent you from getting a mortgage. It will be wiped after 30 years if you haven't repaid it. That's the really crucial bit. And also the repayments vary according to your income. So both of your commentators essentially are right. But will they ever have to repay the full amount is the million-dollar question.
Because it feels a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? People are always nagging at us, get your debts paid off, all that sort of thing. So the idea that you might just let it run feels wrong.
Well, lots of people argue that this is a tax, an extra tax rate, rather than a loan. Effectively, 9% is going to be added, is going to be taken from your salary when you start earning above £21,000 for those students who have graduated since 2012. Now, with the average debt you mentioned of £44,000, the Institute for Fiscal Studies reckons that more than 2/3 of graduates will never repay that full amount because they simply won't earn enough. Martin Lewis from Money Saving Expert reckons that you'd need a starting salary of £40,000 upon graduation to even get close to paying it off.
Now, you actually yourself, you considered paying your stepson's loan earlier, I think.
Yes, no, I did. I mean, I'm not a rich person, but certainly when I looked at 3.9% interest was being applied to his loan while he was still at university, that was something that shocked both of us. Of course, once you graduate, it will depend on what you earn in your first job. The interest rate can fall back down again. But certainly many parents and many readers of the Financial Times will be in a position to pay off loans early. But unless you know what your child is going to earn, it could be better to use that money towards a housing deposit because they'll always have to pay a mortgage or pay for somewhere to live, rather than paying off a debt that theoretically they may never have to pay back.
That was Claire Barrett.
So we advised them to max out on student loans and they followed our advice. We did this trusting the government to keep to its word and all the essential elements of the loan. The government has now reneged on a key element of the loan, so we feel we advised our children wrongly, and they feel betrayed yet again by a government that first raised tuition fees to £9,000 and has now broken faith over the terms of the loan. And even so, what real choice is open to my children or any student today? If you want a university education, you need that loan under any terms. It's not far off out-and-out extortion. A recent graduate, Alex True, raised an e-petition, Stop Retrospective Changes to the Student Loans Agreement, This attracted over 130,000 signatories, triggering a parliamentary debate on 18th of July this year. During the debate, the responsible minister Joseph Johnson confirmed that the freeze would increase the amount students repaid on their loans by only £6 per week, equivalent to £4,000 over the lifetime of the loan. These amounts come from an independent IFS study. And remember, this is not just the current students, but all future generations of students who will be saddled with this extra payment. On the fairness of the government's actions, he had this to say.
Pay the most back into the system. So David, student loans are very different from a mortgage or credit card debt. Repayments are determined by income, not by the amount borrowed. Borrowers are protected. If at any point their income drops, so do their repayments. Borrowers will only repay if they earn above the threshold, and the loans are cancelled after 30 years. So many borrowers, as I said, do not repay the full amount. This is part of the taxpayer's conscious investment in our country's skills base. I recognise that honourable members are concerned that students may not be fully aware of the terms and conditions of their loans at the time of application. The Student Loans Company does, however, provide students with a clear statement of these terms before the student completes their application for a loan. And I will shortly, one second. And on page 3 of the student loans a guide to terms and conditions, it does state clearly, this is not hidden in some small footprint, it's actually on page 3. It says the regulations may change from time to time, and this means the terms of your loan may also change. This guide will be updated to reflect any changes, and it's your responsibility to ensure you have the most up-to-date version. Furthermore, it's worth actually noting that the threshold freeze itself did not actually change the terms and conditions. It merely left them unchanged. This information includes the way in which interest will be applied and the repayment terms that will apply. Students are asked explicitly to confirm that they understand the information before they are granted the loan. All of the information that the SLC provides to students is reviewed regularly to ensure that it is both accurate and accessible. I give way.
You have to applaud his arrogance and seeming blithe ignorance as to the real context. He seems to suggest that if students didn't like what they saw in the terms and conditions, they could walk away from the loan as if it were some inessential item of furniture. He completely ignores the reality of that time, of these times. Unless you have super rich parents, you need a loan to go to university. There is only one viable loan provider. You have no choice but to accept their terms and conditions. And then to crown it all, he says the link between repayment threshold and average earnings growth is not even in the terms and conditions. Well, I suppose that answers why students and graduates didn't need to be informed, nor any guides updated. There was no obligation to do so. But it's here the fragility of the student loan agreement is laid bare. A crucial factor that affects the amount graduates pay back can be varied at will by this or any other government. The student or graduate burdened with this loan has absolutely no right of appeal or redress. So let's examine Joseph Johnson's, the minister's assertion that the terms and conditions are clearly and transparently set out in the Student Loan Guide. As far as I'm aware, this guide is the only document that sets out any detail of the terms and conditions. It's easy to find in Google, but strangely not within the online account set up for every student who takes out a student loan. You might think that once a student has accepted a loan, there will be a clear, permanent statement of the detail of this loan within their online account, but there isn't. Since the minister cited this document, I must assume it is the most definitive statement available. Well, first there's a problem of logic implied in page 2 of the guide, which the minister said was page 3. We're told that this guide, the 2016-17 guide, contains the current terms and conditions of your loan, and that this guide will be updated to reflect any changes, and it's your responsibility to ensure you have the most up-to-date version. So if a student takes out a loan in 2016, and the terms and conditions change in 2026, which guide should they consult? Which one gets updated? Not this one, on the grounds that it is only detailing the current terms applying in 2016-17. And if the 2026 guide is updated to reflect retrospective changes to a 2016 loan, That's not the one on which the student was advised. In any event, does this mean a graduate has to scrutinise 30 issues of this guide over the lifetime of the loan, looking for possible changes in the terms and conditions? And then we have this chain. You must agree to repay your loan in line with regulations that apply at the time repayments are due, leading to a visit to the webpage legislation.gov.uk. Well, what on earth are you meant to do with this? Having thoroughly read the guide, I'm really none the wiser about the detail of the terms and conditions of the loan. There is no clear statement, just a mess of obfuscation. Obviously, though, something in the agreement is subject to change through changing regulation. What is it? The repayment plan 2 on page 7 looks like a cosy loan plan I might have on a piece of furniture. But is the 9% payback rate subject to terms and conditions? Could that change? If it could, shouldn't there be an asterisk warning me subject to terms and conditions? Similarly, are the rates at which loan interest are calculated on page 9 subject to terms and conditions? Again, shouldn't I be warned in this guide that they could change? And finally, is the 30-year term of the loan subject to change? And if it is, again, I should be advised so. Only one thing to do, as any other student or parent might. I'll ring Student Finance and surely they can clarify matters. I specifically want to know whether the 9% repayment rate and the 30-year term of the loan can be changed by this government or any other government during the lifetime of the loan. I also want to know what guidance is given out on how the repayment threshold changes through time. Does it rise in line with average earnings?
Thanks for calling Student Finance England. If you're calling about evidence to support your application, please press hash now. Otherwise, if you've still to apply for a loan or grant, press 1. If you've already applied, press 2. Or if you're calling about repaying your... Good morning, Student Finance England. How may we help you?
Oh, hello. I'm a parent of, my boy's he's approaching university age. He'll be probably going to university next year. And I've been reading through the terms and conditions of the student loan as published in Students' Loans, A Guide to Terms and Conditions.
Okay.
2016-17. I just want to confirm my understanding of things, really. Could you help me or someone else?
Okay, well, I'll certainly look to give you some advice with regards to the application process and any questions you may have about the applications themselves.
Not so much the application.
George, may I have your name, please?
My name's Tony.
Thank you, Tony. Now, to enable me to access into an account today, it is not...
No, I need to talk to someone then about how the repayments work and confirm my understanding of it.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'll transfer you through to the repayment line and they'll be able to go through all of the information with
Okay.
you, Tony, okay?
Thank you.
So thank you. I hope you have a lovely weekend.
You too.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon, Student Loans Company. Is that Tony?
It is, yes.
Send you calling because you've got a few questions regarding repayments?
Yes, in general, they're general questions, because my youngest son is about to, well, he's 17, he'll be starting university next year. I want to advise him on the whether he should take out a student loan and feel I ought to really understand the terms and conditions myself. Is that fair enough?
Right, okay. Well, I can certainly advise on the repayment side of the loan there. So what questions is it that you have?
Well, I'm looking at Student Loans, A Guide to Terms and Conditions, as published by Student Finance, 2016-17. Are you aware of that document?
Yeah.
Okay. And as I understand it, if my son did take out a loan next academic year, he would be under what's currently called Repayment Plan 2.
That's correct.
And the basics of that Repayment Plan 2 is he'll repay the loan debt at the rate of 9%, above a payment threshold of $21,000 a year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's 9% of what he earns above the threshold of 21,000, but it's taken as monthly deductions.
Okay.
Through the UK tax system.
And reading through the rest of that document, the debt is cancelled after a 30-year period if not fully repaid.
Sorry, the line cut out slightly there. I didn't quite catch that.
The debt is cancelled after 30 years if not fully repaid.
Yes, that's correct. 30 years after entering into repayment, so he would enter repayment the April after he left university,
Yep.
as that's the start of the tax year, and then it will be 30 years from interim repayment that the loan will be written off.
Okay, thanks for that. That confirms that understanding. I'm looking at page 2 of the document, and under the paragraph your loan contract, it states things like you must agree to repay the loan in line with the regulations that apply at the time the repayments are due, subject to the regulations being amended from time to time. And then in the preceding paragraph, what this guide's about, it says the regulations may change from time to time, and this means the terms of your loan may change. Now, that 9%, let's take one of the factors of repayment. The repayment of 9%, is that something that could be subject to change during the 30-year lifetime of the loan?
That is something that may change. However, it hasn't changed since these kind of student loans were first introduced back in 1998. The 9% has always been the same. So, could the government at any time in the... It doesn't seem like it's subject to change any time soon.
No, well, my question really is...
That may be subject to change would be the retail price index, which is what we base the interest on the loan on.
Well, that shouldn't affect it. The retail price index is just racking up the interest debt on the loan. It's nothing to do with the rate of repayment. You're confusing me now.
Sorry. Well, in regards to the only thing that would change on the loan, because like I say, the 9% repayment is that has been the same since the student loans were first introduced in 1998.
Okay, but sorry. These loans extend over a period of 30 years.
Yeah.
That's roughly 6 governments. Could any future government come in and change that rate of repayment from 9%? Do you know the answer to that?
I can't really give an answer to that because, like I say, for the foreseeable future, that's not going to change, the 9%. It's been exactly the same for the last couple of governments that's been in.
Okay, but let's look at the presentation in the document. You know, you've got on page 7, you've got repayment plan 2. It all looks nice and cosy, like you're paying off the debt on a piece of furniture. It says you'll repay 9% of your income over this 30-year period implied. I don't see any stars or asterisks on that 9% saying subject to terms and conditions.
Well, that would be that the 9%, since it's in the terms and conditions when it is that it's signed, that 9% could be set in stone. Well,
you're telling me it's not set in stone. It could change. It could change.
But it could be if any changes do happen. What would happen is that we would notify the customers.
Well, well, that's no good. If someone's making their financial future on a 30-year loan, they don't want halfway through the loan suddenly to realise that they're going to be paying back at a rate of more than 9%. Does everything you've said about 9% also apply to the loan term? Could that be extended out from 30 to 35 years?
No. The loan term that is set in stone. If that is down as 30 years, that will stay as 30 years.
Okay. Now I may have got this wrong, but you know the repayment threshold is currently 21,000.
Yeah.
I thought that would rise in line with average earnings over the course of the loan. Is that true?
Sorry, again, the line cut out there. So the repayment threshold.
The repayment threshold is currently 21,000.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I've heard somewhere that will rise in line with average earnings increases over the period of the loan. Is that correct?
For the next few years, the repayment threshold will be 21,000.
Okay.
We've got that. We've been informed of that by the government. That will stay at 21,000 for the next few years. But then after that, it may rise the same way that with our Plan 1 type loans, that threshold does rise in every tax year slightly.
Okay, so if I understand this right, supposing my son took out, let's say, it doesn't really much matter. He takes out a student loan next academic year.
Yeah.
He'd graduate in 2019-20, yeah? So the threshold would be still 21,000 at that point.
Yeah.
So if he went into a salary of £25,000, he'd be paying 9% on the £4,000 difference?
Yes, he would pay 9% of the £4,000 difference.
Okay. The following year, the threshold's still frozen at 21,000, yeah?
Yeah.
So he's still paying 9% on 4,000 if his salary stays the same. The next year, average earning index goes up by 10%, then the threshold of repayment also goes up by 10%. Is that right?
No. In terms of the repayment threshold, that would only rise slightly. I can't give an exact percentage on how much that may rise because, like I say, for the foreseeable future, we've been advised that will stay at 21,000.
Well, this is important because can't you see the problem here? If that repayment threshold is effectively kept fixed through the lifetime of a loan of 30 years at 21,000, my son is going to be paying more and more tax on a greater proportion of his taxable income. I mean, tax as in the form of his loan repayment.
Well, if his salary rises and the threshold stays the same, then the deduction amount would increase because it is 9%.
Yeah, I don't think you follow me on my point. Well, let's make this simple. Where are the terms and conditions that actually state how the repayment threshold will rise in line with average earning index? Because they're not stated in this document. Where are they stated?
Like I say, because as far as we're aware, it will stay at 21,000. It's not in the terms and conditions.
Well, I'm sure you're aware that this freezing of the freezing of the repayment threshold was something that was only done 6 months ago. In the original intention of student loans, the repayment threshold was meant to rise in line with average earning index. So there must be some statement somewhere of what that linkage is. Can you not guide me to that?
Well, I can try and find out for you there, Tony, but like I say, because as far as we're aware, it'll stay at 21,000, I may not be able to provide you with an answer, but I can still take a look.
Yeah, sure, take a look. You can contact me or give me links to where there is a clear statement before this arbitrary freeze on the repayment threshold. At the time these loan agreements were first mooted in 2012, there must be a statement of how the repayment threshold was going to rise in line with average earnings index.
Okay.
So, yeah, if you find that information out for me, that'd be great.
Is it okay to place you on hold just while I have a look?
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Well, I'm still waiting here after about 5 minutes for the chat to come back to me. Could be that my phone battery's going to run out by the time I get any response, but I'll hang in on here.
Thank you for holding, Tony.
Hello there.
Okay, so I've taken a look there. First of all, I can confirm that the 9% is set in stone.
9% set in
9%
stone.
repayment
Great.
is set in stone.
Yep.
Now, in terms of the threshold,
Yep.
as far as we're aware, they're fixed until April of 2021.
Yep.
But we don't have the information in terms of how they will rise.
How they will rise? No, but let me just get it straight. If they do rise, then even though my son will take out a loan next year, he will benefit from that rise in the threshold. Yep. It's not as if when he takes out the loan next year, the threshold is set at 21,000 for the full 30 years of the loan.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, the threshold, like I say, the threshold's set until 2021.
Yep.
Now, if that does rise,
Yep.
then it would rise if your son's, for example, if your son's salary stayed at 25,000, then
Yep.
the rise in the threshold would mean his deductions amount would decrease.
Excellent, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, thanks for your time.
Okay, is there anything else I can help you with today?
No, that's fine, thank you. So, the 9% payback rate and the 30-year term are apparently set in stone. But if you're a student about to take out a loan, I'd advise you to bookmark this YouTube video for the next 30 years, just in case. But the detail given out on the repayment threshold is at best vague. In my opinion, it's woefully inadequate and misleading. I just about did extract some statement that there was a potential for the repayment threshold to rise in line with average earnings. So is there a case of mis-selling student loans now the government have frozen the repayment threshold? Some of you watching this may want to pursue that action. You could use freedom of information requests to obtain past staff training manuals given out to student finance or student loan company employees manning the telephone lines. You could discover what advice was written in these manuals about answering questions about the repayment threshold. Better still if you could obtain actual recorded conversations that advised that the repayment threshold would rise in line with earnings. I suspect, though, that this government might wriggle off this hook on the technicality that nothing was ever pledged or written into the terms and conditions about it. But they can't really escape or refute the accusation of deviousness and a breach of faith that I would argue is tantamount to fraud. So this is what I want. I want a law to enforce the rise in repayment threshold in line with average earnings, and for this to be applied from 2016 as originally promised. I want a clear statement of how the repayment thresholds will rise with average earnings, clearly stated in the terms and conditions of all student loans, retrospectively from 2012 and going forward into the future. I want a law to prevent the government of the day retrospectively changing any aspect of student loans. That means graduates become more indebted or pay back more than they bargained for when they took out their loan. Government responses such as, "We have no plans to raise the 9% payback rate," or "We have listened to representation because we are a listening and caring government, we have decided not to freeze the repayment threshold." These are simply not adequate because they can't be relied upon in the long term. We need law to protect students and graduates, our children, from the government of the day. We can't leave them at the mercy of some government wanting to cook its books by predating on student loan debt. What can you do? Well, get angry and get involved. Pass this YouTube video on to anyone you think might be interested. If you're a student, pass it on to your local NUS rep. Perhaps hand out information or consider broadcasting this video at University Open Days. Your university will certainly sit up and take notice if they feel their steady stream of tuition fee and halls of residence rental income is in any way jeopardised by parents and students being put off for university education because of this fraud in the current loan arrangement. Sign my e-petition. Although it covers much of the same ground as Alec True's, it goes further in demanding a law, an act of Parliament, to protect against the government of the day retrospectively cheating graduates. And ask your local MP to raise this issue as a parliamentary question. Joe Johnson, the same Sir Joe Johnson who responded to Alex True's petition, is steering a higher education and research bill through this Parliament. Send him this video to remind him of his disgraceful performance in the Alex True debate. Perhaps he can be shamed into incorporating the protection I'm demanding into this new bill. Now's the time to make a noise.